Let's try Jack from Minnesota. Jack from Minnesota, welcome to the David Pakman Show.
Hear me?
Oh boy, I heard you, but you sound totally digitalized, like modulated like a robot.
Is this better?
Oh, that's so much
Is this
better, Jack.
better?
Yes, yes, yes.
Oh my God, thank you. Okay, so I just have a short question that I've been like thinking about. Like in the past 2 decades, there have been, I wrote this down. In the past 2 decades, there have been a lot more instances of Democratic senators in red states than there are today. I'm from the Midwest, and I know in this region alone, there have been Democratic senators from Iowa, North Dakota, Indiana, and Missouri, and even South Dakota. I also know right now there are Democratic senators in Montana, Ohio, and West Virginia. So many people on our side say that these red states are like too far gone. But with all the evidence pointed to the contrary, I just have to disagree. So, do you think there can be more Democratic senators in red states in this era? And if so, what can Democrats and the left do to make these races in 2024, like North Dakota, Indiana, and Missouri, like more competitive?
So
Yeah.
the history of Democratic senators in red states is a little more complex than you're suggesting, but you're completely right. So in order to understand it, you kind of need to think about the gradual party realignment that took place during the civil rights movement, historical party affiliations, incumbency advantages, the often more conservative views of Democratic senators in red states on local issues while still maintaining a sort of more traditional Democratic left-wing perspective nationally. There's a whole bunch of different things that are
Well,
going on here. Oh, go ahead.
I'm saying in the past 2 decades. So I'm not like saying the past 100 years. I'm saying in like the past 2 decades, there have been all these senators from red states that are Democrat.
Yes. And so I agree with you completely. What can be done to better have a shot at some of those races? Two things come to mind. Number one, there is a timing aspect to this where depending on, there's 100 senators with 6-year terms. So a third of them are up for reelection every 2 years. A critical aspect to when Democratic Senate candidates in red states have a shot, it's connected to, is there a high turnout Democratic presidential candidate that same year? When the elections of these Democratic would-be senators in red states align with, hey, we've got to get a Republican president out of power, or we've got to reelect a Democratic president, those candidates tend to do better than when that is not the case. That is a timing thing. You can't really control that very much. So then it gets to what can you control? I don't think there's anything special about what needs to be done. Number one, run the campaign that's the right campaign for the electorate in your state. If you're running in Montana versus if you're running in New York as a Democrat who wants to be senator, you're going to have to adopt a different sort of approach, tone, and probably policy positions if you want to have a shot. That's number one. Number two, you have to have the strong ground game. There's a false notion over the last 10 years or so that you can basically centralize these campaigns. And so, hey, we've got a Democrat running in South Dakota and we've got a Democrat running in California. We'll run all of these campaigns from DC. Doesn't work. You got to run the campaigns locally. You got to have the ground game, and it relates to running the right campaign for the state. And then number three, unfortunately, we're still in an era of fundraising and fundraising determining so much of who has a shot. And I think it has to be made really clear to donors, hey, listen, you might not really be thinking about South Dakota, but there's 100 senators. Every single one is worth the same when it comes to the balance of the Senate. So even if you're in North Carolina, you should really consider donating to this race in South Dakota.
Okay, thank you. That's informative. Thank you.
All right, Jack from Minnesota, thank you so much for the call.